Coleg y Cymoedd. Matt Collins is going to present for us now. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Matt Collins. I'm the Teaching and Learning, Teaching Development Champion, at what was formerly the Ystrad Mynach College. It's now post-merger Coleg y Cymoedd. Back in 2012, in November 2012, when this sort of project was just sort of getting started, we were a newly appointed teaching development mentor team, tasked with the notion of moving teaching development away from the idea of inset events and more towards a continuous development based on supported experiments. So when this project came up, we didn't really have a model that we could use for supported experiments, so we saw this as an opportunity really to develop a model for supported experiments that worked within our college. And we chose to focus initially on a theme of giving feedback. The reasoning for this was that it had come up as in various quality improvement initiatives, internal inspections, as a consistent area that needed to be improved. So we started off, we did a lot of research into different types of feedback methods, and on the plus side was that all the research out there says feedback works, especially if you do it in the right format. It's given lots of labels, formative assessment, medal and omission, but it's basically when you focus on what's been achieved and what still needs to be done, feedback has a huge effect size, anything up to 2 GCSE grades depending on who you're reading. But when we questioned staff as to the reason why maybe feedback was being held back, the consistent message we got was always time. And when we did the maths on this, what they were saying to us, we couldn't really argue with it. If you take a teacher and he's taking in 15 lots of work to mark and he's doing that in every lesson, pretty soon you get to a point where it's an unmanageable situation. So we couldn't really argue with the maths. But what we could argue with was this notion that all feedback has to be detailed written feedback coming from the tutor. So we looked at all the different ways that feedback can be varied. An interesting book by a chap by the name of Graham Nuttall, Hidden Lives of Learners, and he points out that 80%, when you watch a class, 80% of the feedback doesn't even come from the tutor at all. It's coming from their peers. So thinking about where the feedback is coming from, does it all have to come from the tutor? Varying the media, so does it all have to be written? There's verbal, there's audio, you can give feedback online, you can give feedback via video. And then vary the type. Let's have a reality check on this. Sometimes feedback does have to be fairly cursory, maybe feedback given to groups. We accept the fact that all learners are entitled to sort of detailed written feedback on their work, but that's not to say that you stop giving any other type of feedback. So what we were looking for was for teachers to experiment with a range of different strategies related to giving feedback. And we set some objectives of what these strategies were trying to achieve. You can see that some of them are related to the skill set of the teacher, some of them are the skill set of the students themselves, and some of them are to do with the outcomes. We particularly like the one about closing gaps between the high and low performing learners. So the strategies that achieve that. So what I want to do is just quickly go through some of the strategies that teachers experimented with and some of the feedback that we got from both teachers and students about how effective they were in meeting those objectives. Now, the headings that I've used here are basically the headings that we've organised them within the booklet. So we looked at strategies that encouraged reflective practice in the students. These are simple little things that can be introduced at the end of a session, things like using 1-minute paper, post-it notes, that kind of thing. And what we found we got from teachers was a real sort of, wow, that was so simple to introduce. It's a couple of minutes that you do at the end, and it's having an impact, and no matter what the impact is, if it's that simple to introduce it, why not do it? Some involved a little bit more planning, things like getting hold of equipment, like the thinking cubes. But again, a very simple strategy that can be used, which encourages the learners and the teachers both to reflect on what's been done in that session. We looked at self-assessment and peer assessment. We looked at a whole range of strategies that people were using for self and peer assessment. For example, using model answers, using skills rubrics. Some were using criteria-based pro formas. We really found that peer assessment especially was a standout winner in terms of narrowing that gap between the high-performing and low-performing students. There was one example where we had a group of construction students doing drawing exercises. Within 3 sessions of using peer assessment, we found that the level of mistakes across the group had gone from 28 within that group to 3 in just 3 sessions of using peer assessment. So it really stood out as this huge impact that it was having. The one caveat with that was that, and this was alluded to in the Graham Nuttall book that I spoke about earlier, students have to be coached in how to do this properly before they can apply it. If you just ask them to do peer assessment or ask them to do self-assessment, it probably won't work. You need to take time out to actually find out what their current skill level is on that. Technology, some of our staff made use of various forms of technology, using things like interactive voting devices, using things like Socrative for formative assessment, and then making videos of the assessment, using video for assessment and for feedback. What we found with the first 2 of those, using the voting devices and Socrative, was again it gave that immediate feedback that students and really identified gaps before they became embedded in what the students were doing. The video as well, what we found is it vastly increases the students' ability to articulate what they've learned, and they get fantastic feedback as well just from watching themselves back on the screen and seeing the kind of things that they've said. So that sort of self-assessment, if you like, by looking back at what they've learned. And then just simply introducing whole class questioning techniques will massively increase the amount of feedback. Some of these we've lifted. Quick on the Draw is taken from an excellent book. You're probably all aware of it, Teacher's Toolkit by Paul Guinness. Assertive questioning, we've already spoken about earlier, but just little things like introducing mini whiteboards. Again, the feedback was immediate. It meant that teachers could jump on gaps and deficiencies in the knowledge, and that they could deal with them before they became too embedded. Also, the big thing that we got back from students is that it was a fantastic bit of feedback just to realize I'm not the only one in the room who doesn't get it. When they realize that if you're only ever asking the brightest guy in the class, the rest of the class are all going, oh, right, I'm the only one who doesn't get it. If you're getting feedback from the whole class, they're getting that piece of feedback that they're not the only one in the room who doesn't get it. And that can be a very motivating, rewarding piece of feedback for them. So the findings that we got, all the teachers and the students who've been involved, they've reported that they've had an increased engagement in the assessment process. So the students are a lot more aware of what's expected of them in terms of the assessment process. Higher motivation levels, improved quality of students' work, so actually less rework, less marking. If you use the formative feedback effectively, when you get to the summative stage, you're finding that there's a lot less rework, less marking to do. And that introducing this technology, the feedback that we get from students, we've had comments like, oh, we're learning so much about ourselves and we're just having fun. They really enjoy interacting with the technology. They love things like, come on, get your phones out, rather than, oh, you put your phone away. That kind of thing, it just, they have found very motivating, and it really adds to the richness of the feedback that they're getting. The outcomes that we've got, I've alluded to the booklet, all the strategies that I'm kind of glossing over them here, but they're a detailed explanation, and the kind of feedback that we've got from teachers and students is available in the booklet. The other thing is that supported experiments have really become embedded in the staff room vocabulary. I'm having staff stop me all the time now and say, I've got my PMAR observation, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to try that strategy that we were talking about. So it's really had a huge impact in the willingness of staff to try things out in their PMAR observations. We recently had an inspection of teaching and learning. We were expecting at this point that possibly staff might go back into their shells and resort to traditional teaching methods. It didn't happen. There was huge evidence within that people were really experimenting with new ideas and really willing to stick their neck out. So it's had a huge impact on the sort of vocabulary that's going on in the staff room. At that inspection that I've just spoken about, the number of teaching observations that were graded as good or excellent rose from 59% to 89%. And that's from November 2012 until just last month, basically in 2014. So it's had a huge impact, and supported experiments was mentioned within the inspection report as a major contributing factor towards that. So that's really good feedback for the team. What are we going to do next? We need more methods for disseminating what's going on. There's still too many pockets of staff working on individual experiments. We need lots of methods, things like using our intranet, using inset days. We're thinking of setting up things like peer observations, teaching squares, that kind of thing, to try to get staff going into each other's classes and have a look at what each other are doing. We've decided to really focus on peer assessment and zoom in on that one because it seems to have been the sort of standout winner in terms of the kind of achievement that we're getting, and to continue to support and develop these supported experiments. We've got this booklet. What we're aiming for is to have booklets about feedback, with sort of resources related to feedback, but we've got other booklets related to group work, we've got booklets related to Marzano's top 10, and the idea is that we're going to try to move staff away from this sort of writing reams and reams in schemes of work and lesson plans, and more towards this idea of a toolkit of ideas that they can say, right, this is the strategy that I'm going to use to teach this topic, and start marrying topics to strategies. So these experiments are then adding to that toolkit of ideas that and the evidence behind that toolkit of ideas. So that's where we really want to go next with this. Okay, thank you very much for listening.